This summer, at Lowell Park, two titans meet. The oldest rivalry, the biggest stage, the ultimate pressure. The greatest team and that other team face off in battle. KT Rolster versus T1 in the Telecom War. Wait. Stop the trailer. Shut it down. KT didn't make it. What do you mean didn't make it? They lost to DAMWON KIA? And Burdol was in the top lane? What the f***?
Welcome to the Monte and Wolf Show. As usual, it is brought to you by esportsbet.io. There's never been a better chance now to start your way on the world's prediction series, which you can play for free using their proprietary token DJT. And you can get that just by signing up. You'll get a little more for joining their Discord. And if you deposit cryptocurrency, you will get 50 for every dollar of crypto that you deposit on the site. We have a lot of summer playoff matches yet to go in League of Legends. We've got Blast over in CSGO, EPL coming up, and of course, Worlds in the Major later this year. It's a chance to win a lot of real money using DJT or crypto if you deposit crypto yourself. See you over on eSportsBet. Welcome to another episode of the Monte and Wolf Show. We had 4 playoff best of 5s to discuss in LCK. Noted Jin Green Wings enthusiast Wolf. It's always lurking behind his head. That's how big of a fan he was of Teddy back in the old days. That's why, he continues on that train today, just pumping up Teddy whenever he can. However, Teddy wasn't in these playoffs, was he, Wolf?
No, he was not, which is kind of a shame. I didn't think he had his most amazing season ever, but his team certainly did not. So I was very glad the Kwangdong Freaks were not in the playoffs. However, Teddy, I missed him. I would have liked to have him there, but it would have been him or Deft, and Deft played very well in his playoff matches. His team, similarly to Teddy, did not. So,
all right, we'll start there. What do you have to say about the extremely expected results of the matchup that we saw between DRX and Liiv SANDBOX? It was basically, it wasn't a 3-0. It wasn't a 3-0. Deft managed to be a superhero for this series, but it just wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough. His Lucian play was honestly really impressive. I think we've seen very few Lucian players outside of Ruler be able to play Lucian in the late game extremely well, because I think Lucian is one of the hardest AD carries to play in the later parts of mid game and in the late game, because you're both trying to put pressure on and potentially just one-shot people with your Gale Force combo, but you're also extremely low range. So if you don't have enough vision that your team is setting up for you, or you are making a risky call because you don't have that vision, or you're just trying to be like, I think I can execute that support, then you die. Like, your team can't win the next fight. You're off the map. Like, there's no more pressure. It's a really fine line, a tightrope you have to walk, and I think Deft walked it incredibly well. And also just straight up carried team fights, which Lucian usually can't do. He usually kind of does boom damage in the front. Yeah, unless you're Ruler. He does the big damage in the front line, or he kills somebody instantly, then also dies, and then you hope that your team can clean up the rest. He was staying in team fights till the very end, as if he was playing Aphelios or Jinx or something. So it was pretty cool to see. I overall thought Pyosik had a very bad series, and it's sad because Pyosik has had some really high highs this season, especially at the beginning of the season.
He's very streaky.
Yeah. I just want him to be consistent. I just want to see him.
It's also impossible for Pyosik to be good when his teammates are good. This is what I've noticed. When he has bad teammates, he's the best player on the team. When he has good teammates, he's the worst player on the team.
Yeah, it kind of does tend to go like that. And I hope that with what career he has left, because I think he's been very up and down. I don't know where he'll end up. I hope he doesn't end up in LJL next year or something. I don't think it was that bad, but I hope that he can find the consistency because I want to like Pioshik, and I know Deft is very fond of him, which is I think the reason why Deft is on that team. And we've talked about this on the shows in the past, but like on any given day where DRX and Hanwha were playing, when Deft was on Hanwha, like those two guys were hanging out the whole time, walking with each other. Like I would even see them sometimes between games while the rest of the teams are like talking to their coaches. They're like going to the bathroom together, They're inseparable, like very close friends. And I thought it was kind of because of that somewhat sad and ironic that in Deft's last playoffs game of his career, his best friend kind of ran it down while he was playing the most amazing League of Legends that he's played in some time.
Don't worry, he still has a shot versus KT in the regional finals. That can still happen. Well, it's not all over. All he has to do is beat KT, and he gets a one final ticket to Worlds.
True. We'll talk more about that on a future episode, but
KT just lose to themselves now, so it's perfectly doable.
Yeah, is that our transition to to the other quarterfinal match?
Yeah, we should talk about that, Wolf, because both you and I predicted KT to win. Although we did say in the last show that it comes with a pretty enormous caveat that DAMWON KIA does have such insane veteran power on this roster that level of composure may, in fact, push them over the top. But instead, Wolf, what we saw was KT in a moment that was eerily reminiscent, but in fact exactly the opposite of their loss to Liiv SANDBOX and their second best of three in the regular season. So to jog your memories, Liiv SANDBOX and KT was ahead in this series, and Rascal decided to push down the mid lane on Gwen while his team died in a 5v4 at the Dragon, and then they lost the game, and he had no chance of ending this game, right? So it really felt like when they were in this moment versus DAMWON KIA, they were like, nobody go into the mid lane this time, guys. Like, we're not making that same mistake again. Go for that Cloud Soul. Except they didn't have control over the mid wave, and Canyon on Wukong just ulted them at the Dragon, prevented their backs, and then DAMWON just ran down and killed their Nexus. So it was like, they were so concerned. It felt like they were so rattled by the way they lost to Liiv SANDBOX in game 3 of that series that they just made the exact opposite mistake in this game, but it still caused them to lose in game 5.
The game 5 macro mistake that cost them the series was definitely the one that people will talk about the most. I think that the trade Cloud Drake for Nexus meme, I've heard too many times. Like, I'm kind of
it was a Cloud Soul, to be fair, but also
true.
Cloud Soul is like insanely good on their team composition. When you have,
it was
Trundle, Zeri, Gragas. Like, you feel really good when you have Cloud Soul.
I think it was a good call from DAMWON KIA. I incorrectly identified the person making the call as Burdol when we watched the clip back, but it was actually Showmaker who made the call to push mid. I'm told. I don't have the comms anymore, but they happened live.
They took them away from you?
Well, I mean, I could go back and watch them. I just don't have them. Like, I didn't like go and I don't have them in front of me or anything like that. But I was told after the cast that in fact it was Showmaker who made the call. But that moment in the best of 5 was, I think it could happen to any team of this experience, like any team that's this uncoordinated in terms of like making the raw proper shot calling in this extremely tense moment. I think it could have happened to Gen.G. Like, probably not. I think they're way less likely, but it could happen to any team, right? My issue with KT's play in this series was that aiming did not play well at all, and no one played well around him, and KT didn't look like the KT we had seen that gave us the confidence to predict them. I talked to the Korean commentators before that series because I thought, okay, the global casters all voted for KT, but they were all like, oh, I feel like this is a mistake. Like, they were not sure in their predictions. Like, Atlas and Chronicler were like, voted for KT, but I feel like it's going to be a close series. Think KT could definitely throw it. And I was like, absolutely not. 3-0. I went and talked to the Korean commentators. I can't remember who was casting that day. I know Konkui was like, I think it's going to be a close series, but it's definitely KT. And I can't remember the other caster on the day, but the other color commentator was like, no, KT wins like easy. Like, this is like, he was on the same page as me. And then we saw like all the predictions come up on the screen. and only Cloud Templar said 3-2 DAMWON. Everyone else, literally every other person predicted KT.
I think
And
it
I
was
was
the
like,
only
all right.
reasonable prediction given what
Yeah.
had gone on.
Because KT had looked so incredibly good in their last series, that last several sets of series that they had played in regular season. I mean, even in that loss to Liiv SANDBOX, which is the most notable one, they were playing very well, and they played around, controlling the top side of the map. And, DAMWON threw a bit of a curveball in terms of the roster through playoffs. So, yeah, that was a different thing than they may have expected. But either way, still should be able to use that as a win condition. They did not. They tried to play around aiming. He went 0-3, I believe, in game 1. It might have been game 2, but he was not having
3. I mean, but he also was just randomly inting. Like, he literally just died in river for no reason at one point in time, like trying to rotate into mid lane. So I think there were definitely nerves as KT started this series because some of their players were making, I would say, uncharacteristic mistakes.
So that was my issue with KT, is they didn't play to the level that we came to expect to them. And I even had people calling me out on Twitter saying I was biased for KT because I kept saying that. But like, the truth is, they looked so much better weeks ago.
And besides, if everybody thinks that KT is going to win and they don't, and DAMWON wins, then it says something about DAMWON KIA as well, and the changes that they made, and the fact that they were willing to take this risk and run Burdol into their matches. We'll get to the Nuguri substitution and whether we think it was right for them to pull him back out after game 3 in a little bit versus T1, because that's probably going to dominate most of the conversation is that series because it was the closest and most interesting.
This was close, but for the wrong reasons, I think. Like, it wasn't really close. It was just baffling, the nerves that KT showed. And then also, DAMWON KIA didn't play the cleanest series either. They looked much better in their series against T1, which leads me to believe that the Burdol change was a little bit more of a last-minute decision.
Do you know anything about this? What are the rumors about?
I asked about it. I asked about it several times, see if I get an answer. And the one answer I got, regardless of who I asked, was Burdol is being subbed in because he has the stronger shot calling.
But they have Bible. I just want to check. They have Bible, and they put Bible in, and they nearly beat Gen.G with Bible.
And he was shot calling.
And then they take him out, and they put Burdol in over Nuguri because Burdol is better
at shot calling. That's what they said. And this is, mind you, the player who against T1 spent every moment he was on camera like this. And then was pretty silent when we saw him in game. I think maybe that was a PR answer. I don't know if that was actually true. I'm not trying to insinuate that it's not, but I didn't see the better shot calling. I thought it was him when I watched those final moments in Game 5 where they did go and kill KT's Nexus. It looked like he was making the call, but it was Showmaker who said it first. But beyond that, like, I didn't see anything that really stood out in terms of communication there. He looked much more composed in that KT series than he did in the T1 series. I think obviously a higher pressure situation against T1, and he's being subbed in and out, so like there's a lot of added pressure there. We'll talk about that later, but I think that DAMWON were not quite ready yet against KT with what they were trying to do with Burdol, at least what we think they were trying to do with Burdol. And it looked much better against T1. So that series just really left a bad taste in my mouth because on one hand, it was a 5-game series, which is usually epic, and we don't normally get those in quarterfinals. But it felt epic for the wrong reasons because both teams really underperformed. And I walked away from that series being like, neither of these teams are going to the finals. Definitely not. Is where I walked away from that series. Like, it was
the way we build it was KT in their current form. If DAMWON wins, DAMWON's going to have to, transcend to the next level. We'll see shadows of old DAMWON KIA, right? But we didn't even get Nuguri, so that wasn't possible. And then the way they won was more off of the games they won were, a lot of them were KT making really big blunders, culminating with that moment at the very end of the game where KT completely misplayed that situation. And to DAMWON's credit, they realized that they could end. Like, that's not nothing. And they they very quickly divided their players so that some were stopping the backs and preventing them from getting to the base. It was a good play by DAMWON, and I don't want to take that away.
100%.
But it was also enabled by the fact that, KT left an opening that maybe they shouldn't have. And especially at this point in the game where we're talking about an extremely fed Zeri-Yuumi combination, they should have a substantial advantage when it comes to these late game team fights.
They also played into Renata, and Kellen had a fantastic game of Renata, where he was just kind of sitting and waiting. There was that very famous moment, if you're a Cadril fan, where he ulted over the wall.
It was a really good ult.
It was a good ult. It was not mechanical, but
no,
he ulted over the wall.
Don't you worry.
And he ulted over the wall, and he stopped the entirety of KT's comp, which was looking to die through a choke point around that dragon. And he had good positioning. I think DAMWON were very aware by the end of that series, especially in Game 5. Like, it felt like they had downloaded KT and they knew exactly what KT was going to do at any given moment. Even though their mechanical plays, DAMWON's in that final game, were not perfect, and there were some errors there, and it was still a very close game. It felt like DAMWON was one step ahead of the curve at the end of all things, and I think that's part of why Gen.G also beat Liiv SANDBOX. The same sort of style. Eventually, if you just do the same thing every game, and your opponents are more versatile than you, you will lose. It happens.
Well, I think the problem with Gen.G versus Liiv SANDBOX, by the way, which completely corroborated everything that we said on the last version of this show, which is that we think Gen.G is going to pick Liiv SANDBOX no matter who wins versus DAMWON versus KT. That ended up being true. In fact, didn't somebody on Liiv SANDBOX said they hadn't even scrimmed Gen.G in weeks because Gen.G was refusing to scrim them? Who said that?
I don't know who said that. I had heard that, but it might have been just from the coaching staff.
Yeah.
But I had heard that as well.
Right? Like they didn't want to scrim Liiv SANDBOX because they anticipated picking them in this semifinal matchup. And the problem with Liiv SANDBOX versus Gen.G is that Gen.G is just a better version of Liiv SANDBOX, so there's not this stylistic mismatch like we see with DAMWON KIA in a certain way. Like, if we're talking about Gen.G's weaknesses, right, where they have stumbled at times, and by stumbled, I mean still beat DAMWON KIA. Let's be very clear about that. Like, only losing a couple of games over the course of the season. But Gen.G, when something surprising, like there's a surprising team composition, they struggle more at identifying win conditions of that composition. Now, T1 is very good at looking at an enemy team composition, even if it's weird, and figuring out how to pick it apart on the fly. Whereas Gen.G, they're more of a, I'm going to play my own game and my own style, and I'm going to kind of do the same things, regardless of what you're playing. And like, that may be Gen.G's weakness. The problem is that they're so good at doing their own shit that it's very hard to beat them. And Liiv SANDBOX is extremely predictable in terms of what they're going to do. And player for player, they are all better than Liiv SANDBOX. Krako is like the raw, unrefined, unseasoned, unexperienced version of Peanut, where he plays super aggro, but randomly ints sometimes because he doesn't know his limits. Peanut is the super veteran who seems to always know his limits, right? So they have the same level of aggression. It's just one will randomly int and the other one won't. They rely on Prince. Ruler's like the better version of Prince. Chovy is clearly the better version of Closer, and Dove is bad. So there's a huge weakness in the top side of the map that they're constantly going to be dealing with. And I think you saw that game 2, Dove goes 0-9-0, right?
Yeah, and then they played into Dove, which I thought was the most bizarre choice that Liiv SANDBOX could have made.
No. I think that's the right choice. Look,
I disagree.
Here's why.
Go. I'll let you say why first.
Because if you don't prop up Dove, he is definitely going to lose you that game. Whereas maybe if Prince goes even and you can kind of like give Dove a boost so he's not completely useless, then maybe like Prince can actually just pop off and carry a game if he gets ahead, or if he's in an even state. He's still a really good ADC. So I think that if you focus on bot side, you don't necessarily win because you're probably not going to get that big of an advantage for Prince, especially compared to Ruler. But if you do nothing top side, Dove is 0-9-0 and you lose.
I think that if you're going to be playing the style of, well, let's just call it Nila comps. If you're going to be playing the Nila comps that Liiv SANDBOX were running, which makes your composition completely one-dimensional. I think this champion is super overrated. I think she's bad. I think if you could play her perfectly well and you're playing against a weaker team and you want to snowball a game, hell yeah, sure, go for it. If you're playing against one of the best teams in the world in Gen.G, you know, I mean, I get it. You don't want to beat them in a straight-up game because they're better than you, so you want to just try to basically set up ult combos and all in every single fight. Okay, fine. Yeah, you have to play Renekton or Aatrox or something in this type of game. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're like playing weak side bottom, but you have weak side top, and then you have Nila bottom side, and she has some power in the lane, but starts to fall off really early. And then Closer doesn't have any power on either side of the map because he is playing, you know, whatever he's playing is Zir in this case. And he's like, oh, I can't play for Nila, and I can't play for the Ornn that we picked for Dove again, and Thorin's on Aatrox. Like, I get it. You have to play the Renekton in these comps. But I feel like I would have respected Liiv SANDBOX way more if they just put Prince on actual 80 carries all series long, and they said, like, you know what, we're a worse version of Gen.G, but maybe today will be the better version. Like, maybe today we'll go toe-to-toe. Because this strategy felt like, or if they had just done this strategy once or twice and not basically every game in this series, because they basically said, like, we're going to cheese them. And it just felt so sad to watch because even in StarCraft where you proxy a barracks, you cheese somebody in a best of 5 or a best of 7, you don't do that like 3 games in a row. And Liiv SANDBOX was like, yeah, we're gonna just run it back again. And
hey,
they banned the Renata the second time, so it was a little bit easier. They won that second time around.
Look, I think they did some smart things. Like, I appreciated that they ran it back. Like, the confidence and balls you have to run that back, Wolf, when your top laner literally went 0-9-0 in the last match, and you're like, we are gonna first pick Renekton again from this guy. Like, I think that is somewhat commendable.
I commend the confidence as well, and they won with it the second time, they played it better.
And like you said, they banned the Renata. They were doing interesting things in the draft. Like, this was the first time in Korea we've really seen the flex of the Sejuani into the jungle role, which became a theme of this series, and then also in the next series was flexed into the support position, not very successfully by Korea, but it shows that this pick has a lot of versatility right now. And I really like the fact that we are seeing Sejuani flexed in this way because she's another farming jungler. We've kind of seen more and more of these like wait till 6 junglers like Skarner come into the meta. And she still provides the conditional engage because the most important thing that Sejuani does is make it so you don't have to commit to an engage. It's like Ornn, where you just throw out the Ornn horn, and if you hit somebody, you can engage with it. If you don't just lose the fight, right? Yeah. So you can use the Sejuani ult in the same way by fishing for these engages. She provides that tankiness, and you can get some really good aggressive picks in the top lane then because you've successfully kind of moved your hard engage and tank player into the jungle, and she does that better than most other junglers that are available right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're seeing this big resurgence of Sejuani. I think it was played like maybe twice in the whole season, and I couldn't even tell you who because it was so long ago. And now it's being played. I watch LPL playoffs now that we're done with our playoffs, waiting for finals. I'm seeing it over there. Like, it's very, very popular right now. And it's a very strong pick. And like the ways we saw Liiv SANDBOX try to force this game to be played in their style was pretty impressive. Like, I will give them that. And I think they might have broken T1 if there was that matchup for them. Like, that might have actually worked out and they might have been able to take it. But Gen.G just eventually got wise to this and avoided fighting them. And Gen.G's setups on objectives were so careful, where eventually Gen.G always had like triple threats on every objective. They were like, we're not going to stand together. We're going to have 3 people coming into 3 different choke points. And if you guys just try to Nila ult all in us, we're not going to get hit by it and we'll just kill you. And that's why Nila as a champion for me, it's like, it's so strange that she's popular in a region where I do think at the higher end we have such brilliant minds and experienced veterans who will just be like, like she just ults, that's what she does. It's really easy to avoid that.
I also think like, you know, it's becoming predictable. So one of my questions about Neela in pro play was, can you get your support to level 6 by Herald spawn at 8 minutes? And the answer is you can. So that was one of the things that I think Liiv SANDBOX did successfully in this series, was start fights at Herald on Herald spawn when your support is 6 and theirs is not. And so there are, I think, really defined power spikes that you can use with Neela. The problem is it's really fucking obvious and you just don't fight them. Like, give up the fucking Herald. Who cares? Get a plate or two in bot lane while she and the support are just, you know, up at the Herald. Like, just do that instead. Like, trade a cross map objective. Don't fight her when she's strong. Don't fight her when they have this old power spike. And then outscale.
She was being played with lethality items. I don't think that was the case in either of these games. Yeah, no, she went shield bow both times.
You definitely should go shield bow.
Yeah, I think shield bow is the right call. It's like the lethality builds that we were seeing from her at the beginning were just like, I think, furthering the idea that this champion can't do anything later on. And I think,
well, you absolutely can't play a lethality build into an Ornn, which she faced in both of these matchups. So.
And like, similar to what you were talking about the level 6, I thought the idea was going to be at first to hit level 6 and pin the AD carry down so you can win a 3v3 on the Rift Herald. So you're basically saying like the enemy AD carry cannot leave because I'm going to hit 6 and I will all in them if they try to rotate out, or I'm going to kill plates and then I'm going to have the fast rotation. Like, having that extra level, making sure you can basically guarantee a 3v3 fight. Or, you know, worst case scenario, the support gets away, and then the support goes up, but the enemy team is, like, trying to fight with the support, but then the AD carry is dying bottom side, or just getting zoned out of CS. Like, I thought maybe that was the idea, but it hasn't really worked out that way. And when I played a bunch of Neela in solo queue when she first came out, because I was just trying to figure out her kit, I was like, oh, her wave clear is pretty good, but in pro play, like, and realistically, like, she doesn't get, like, an insane push or anything like that. It's not like she's playing, you know, it's not like you're playing a Karma lane or something like that where you're just constantly pushing those waves in. It's not the same sort of thing. And there's another champion that exists into Ornn, by the way, that I think is very good at doing basically the same thing, but actually does more in team fights, is more oppressive in lane. It's called Samira. She's very good. She does a lot. She builds Immortal Shield Bow too. She can win wall the Ornn horn. She can win wall the Ornn horn. She doesn't pull everybody in a fight, but she does a lot of spinning, and she does a lot of damage with other ultimate setups that their composition had. I think Samira would have been very good. They did not try it at all. And by the way, neither of these champions, Samira or Neela, but let's talk about the Neela because that's what was actually picked. That is the opposite type of champion that Prince has found success on all year. He is a ranged late game carry player. Yep. That is what he has done. That is what he's been best at. He said, nah, I'm just going to press the R button in team fights. That's what I'm going to do in this series, at least in those 2 games. And for me, I'm like, okay, I get it. You think maybe Ruler's better than you, but I wish they said, no, actually, we can be as good as Ruler with Prince. We can actually go toe-to-toe to them. And I didn't get to see that this series. And they probably would have lost if they tried to do it that way. But I wanted to see it at least once, like one real game of them trying to play late game AD carries against each other. And
I mean, they did. They played Sivir and Zeri in the final.
There was the Sivir Zeri game, that's true, but it was a Liiv SANDBOX variation. Yeah.
It was a massive stop. I mean, the game was over in 22 minutes. It was brutal.
That was also game 1, so maybe after that one they were like, we're not going to do it anymore. But
no, they played it in both game 1 and game 4, right? But they lost game 1. And the thing about Gen.G is once they get some of these advantages, they can close out these games extremely quickly. And then they look completely done by game 4. That's when the Neela ban came in the second round of the ban phase, and
that was the game. That was the game where they were tilted and they went for the Zeri Sivir and then didn't play the late game AD carry game. They just forced 2 fights within a minute of each other, which were completely unwinnable, and everybody was tilted out of their minds. And so I don't count game 4. Game 1 was also extremely not close. So maybe this is just debunking my whole theory that they should have tried it, but.
I think Liiv SANDBOX knew what they were going up against, and I think mostly this is not that Liiv SANDBOX is a bad team. It's just that Gen.G is better Liiv SANDBOX, and it's really, really hard when you have two somewhat similar styles combining in a match for the worst team at every single position to win that game. Like that's the issue here. And they tried to be surprising, right? But they're just not as versatile as DAMWON KIA. Like DAMWON KIA, you just never know what the fuck they're gonna do. Because like God knows when they pick a champion where it's even going in terms of the draft, where it's going on the map. They could do basically anything. And you just can't be that, you know, that team with this younger group of players on Liiv SANDBOX. And they will be good. And I hope that Liiv SANDBOX is going to Worlds, and that I think they will surprise a lot of people. But are they going to make it past like the quarterfinals at Worlds? Probably not. Probably not. Like this is not, they have limitations, and I think those limitations were on full display.
Yeah. I think that this is a series that every player hadn't had before, really. You know, like these players hadn't really had a series where it's like, okay, we made it against the big bad. How do we beat the big bad? Okay, we choked in the last game. We didn't play to our full potential in one of those games. I think the other three, they pretty much did. And it was one-dimensional, but they made a great adjustment when they ran back the draft the second time. And like you said, it showed a lot of confidence. I think that it was a very telling series in terms of where these players are now. But I think it also means what they learned through this loss will definitely be huge for the upcoming regional qualifier and beyond. So I thought this series was very straightforward and very disappointing if you're a Liiv SANDBOX fan, but also probably good for the long run.
Very fair. All right, guys. We're going to talk about T1 versus DAMWON KIA and preview the finals. First up, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a second. As you'll hear about momentarily, both Wolf and I think that Gen.G are rather significant favorites for the upcoming final versus T1. And as it stands right now, we have Gen.G at 1.507, which is pretty good odds for a favorite that I would probably say is in the 70 to 75% chance to win this series. So with that in mind, we do have a lot of money. Thorne and I have been given $100,000 in USDT by Esports Bet. And if we win, you guys are going to get prizes. So I'm going to do a big one right now. I'm going to put 10,000 USDT onto Gen.G because I think these odds are really quite good at the moment. And we'll see if I'm right or if I'm in tears by this time next week. Welcome back. Now the segment you've all been waiting for, which is, of course, T1 versus DAMWON KIA. The banger of the playoffs, in which DAMWON KIA picks a bunch of weird stuff, which I actually think is kind of good, and then loses in true DAMWON KIA fashion. I talked about this on Summoning Insight, Wolf, but DAMWON KIA in Game 5s. True, they won in the quarterfinals in Game 5. It was a little bit unorthodox when they played against KT. However, in high pressure against great opponents, where they're maybe not so confident, we look at Gen.G versus DAMWON KIA from spring, in which they picked Italy and got robbed via objective bounties of that win. We look at Game 5 of the World Championship last year, where they decide to play Jin Yumi and Canyon on Trundle for reasons that are still mysterious. I feel like this DAMWON KIA team is like, I respect their balls in these Game 5 situations to pull out the weird picks, but sometimes you just wonder why they're doing it when they are winning very hard with certain compositions like we saw in Game 4. And I do think that you should pick Yumi Zeri thing is overrated, because I do think that DAMWON KIA's compositions had answers to that, and certainly they anticipated it coming out. But also, like, why, if you're DAMWON KIA, your biggest problem has been that you don't know how to use your own compositions during the mid and late game. So the more complicated you make them, the more weird shit you do, you are instituting immense operator error into these comms. When you say, oh man, our roster ain't good at shot calling, let's make some roster changes. I don't know if you do this comp, well, I do think it's good against what T1 ran. Maybe stylistically, T1 is the team that can break this down and read you better than you can read yourself. So it feels almost like they were hoisted by their own petard in a way.
I think it was a Danny call. I think which is, I don't know Danny personally, but he has been seemingly, even since his T1 days, very much he's been communicative to the fans. Like, he usually did interviews back then with T1 a lot, and was trying to explain the thought process behind the 10-man roster and stuff like that. But I always felt like Danny was trying to prove that he was the greatest coach of all time, even sometimes at the expense of his team. And I think that this is the kind of draft that if you win with this draft, you are like heralded as a genius and a hero, and
It's
everyone
a good
goes,
draft.
"Wow, he knew the Senna Heimerdinger lane was the answer. Like, what a genius!"
No, let me. Okay,
But however, it did not work at all.
Okay, so let me talk about the parts that I like and don't like about this draft, because it is, to understand this, you do have to get technical on why this is good. So when we're talking about Yumi Zeri, I think there is a misconception about why Yumi Zeri is strong. Like, Yumi Zeri is very strong, but the biggest reason why it's strong is because it allows you to clean up team fights and kill people you could not normally kill. It's like, a team fight starts, and then one team kills one or two of the other members. Now, if the other three disengage, and then maybe one of them recalls and teleports back into an objective, and you can't take Baron anymore because it's a 5 versus 3 or a 4 versus 3, but now they're full HP, and it's very annoying because they can stop you potentially from doing things on the map. Yumi Zeri is very strong because once you start winning, you just win so hard after that, and fucking everybody dies. Nobody can kill you. Like, they can't 1v1 you or 2v2 you in this case, or 1v2 you because of the Yumi, right? You have too much healing, you have too much speed, and you can't run. They will chase you down and murder you. And then there's nobody left on the map. You're aced, or maybe one person's left, and then they get objectives for free. This is why Yumi Zeri is strong. Zeri can be strong by herself because of the W, but specifically this combination. But the key... Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and Heimerdinger turrets will hit you no matter what, even if you're running around really fast. But that's only, of course, assuming that the Heimerdinger turrets are still alive at the time where the Zeri starts zooming around, which was not the case in the late game, unfortunately.
We'll get there. We'll get there, okay? We'll get there. It was played badly by DAMWON, but the theory I don't think is bad. So... This is all to say that you need some level of starting to win a team fight for this composition to work, okay? Now, if we look at DAMWON Kia's draft, what they have is a Heimerdinger, a Azir, Poppy, and Senna. Now, what this composition does super well is make it so you cannot walk into the river through choke points. You cannot do it. You cannot walk through the Sand Soldiers. You cannot walk through the turrets. They've got sustain from the Senna, right? They're going to have increasingly long range as the game goes on. Even if you try, even if you somehow get into the river, Poppy just ults you away. So, and meanwhile, during this whole fiasco, you have Yasuo split pushing, and there is nobody on T1's composition that can stop a Yasuo split. So, the theory behind this is very good, but you have to be able to get to objectives first, and then entrench yourself by having time to set up your vision, turrets,
you need setup
Sand
time.
Soldiers, and as much as people will meme on DAMWON Kia, part of the brilliance of this is T1 knew what they were trying to do, and they kept running back and forth between objectives and mid, and DAMWON, instead of just sitting in river and controlling it, was trying to follow them like they would with a normal composition, and they got dislodged, and they never got their setup. So it was really just badly played by DAMWON, and a really good read by T1.
T1 were super smart about it.
They were super smart about it. And like, if you look at T1's comp, they have a fucking Gnar, Galio, and Wukong. Those are mostly melee champions, because Gnar is going to be melee when you're team fighting with him, right? How the fuck do you even ever get into this composition unless DAMWON Kia is making a positional error?
Yeah, and like the setup overall, when they did set it up, made us realize, like, and we were watching this game, and we called it out in the draft, like the setup, the turrets, etc., all these things that you're talking about, but in practice, when DAMWON was set up, T1, not only did they not fight, they made cross-map plays and they reacted extremely quickly. Like, they were 100% ready for this. And I think this is Faker being a veteran, and he's like, I've seen these comps before, like, and he's telling his team, like, this is what's going on. We're not going to fight this fight, etc. And the times that T1 knew that the critical objectives were coming up, they set up first most of the time. And then in the late game, with the Zeri damage starting to come through, like, the turrets just couldn't actually stay up. Like, they were not set up properly in the later parts of the game, and the damage on T1 side started to stack up so high as well. Even the Galio was starting to do tons of damage. So the composition of DAMWON, I think, really needed to be in a massive lead in terms of Drakes, so they could then be threatening Soul earlier.
Yes.
Trading Drakes was, I think, the biggest problem that they had, because we went to an extremely long game where T1 is happy to go long, and it seems kind of counterintuitive in a way because it's Senna Heimerdinger. So you're like, oh, is it better if Zeri is in the late game against this? Like, we're not sure. Like, we haven't seen this, but I think in practice, actually, yes, Zeri is way better here. And Heimerdinger is still limited based on his setup, is still very vulnerable as a champion. So you need a lot of time, and as split pushing side lane champions get stronger and stronger, like Yasuo's pressure, like, he has a lot of power in the mid game in that side lane that you're talking about, but will eventually just be pushed off of the map and picked if DAMWON KIA are just trying to force setup early on an objective, and he can't be side laning anymore, so then T1 have more side lane control. Like, the theory of this draft was insanely good for DAMWON. I really like it, and I like the way that they did set up around objectives. I think they knew what they were doing, but eventually, like, Zeri is a problem, and we saw that last Drake fight, or the last, Elder fight, was so messy because DAMWON weren't able to get the proper setup they wanted to prevent the engage from T1. And, like, the first 3 seconds of the fight looked like, who's winning? Like, there's 10 champions on top of each other. Like, they're on top of the Heimerdinger turrets. But, like, T1 won the fight so fast. The Heimerdinger long-term Leandri's damage wasn't a factor. It didn't matter. And also, Yasuo in this draft, like you said, the split push win condition there, the lane strength that he had, didn't really end up showing, didn't end up leading to any advantages. And then he was just a melee champion in the late game that couldn't do very much because it wasn't great setup for his ult.
It was played badly, but, like, you have these two things that can happen, which is, like, I agree, you need to prioritize those dragons and the dragon stacking in order to make this work. That is extremely important. But what was good about T1 is, like I said, when DAMWON would start to set up, T1 would push mid, and then DAMWON, instead of just sitting there and just being like, fine, fucking push mid. Our goal is to take dragons. They would then rotate into mid, lose all their Heimerdinger turrets that they had put down, and lose all their positioning. And then T1 would just run them back and forth between mid and dragon, and they never got the setup. Like, in a world, you can envision this, okay? How this composition is supposed to work is you get a Baron or you get a Dragon Soul, right? And if this composition, by the way, if DAMWON KIA didn't get Baron stolen, I think they actually win this game. Because
a pretty good chance.
Because if
the Yuumi
they have
steals
Baron,
everything.
Yeah, if they have Baron, okay, here's what happens. You take Azir into a lane, you put the turret behind you in mid lane, you put the Azir turret up, and then they somehow, with Zeri, which doesn't have the longest range in the universe outside of the W, the Galio, Gnar, Wukong, so 3 melee champs, have to stop a siege of a Baroned up Azir Senna Heimerdinger. Like, and they have Senna heals, and if you try and dive them, they just poppy ult you. So, like, if they get Baron, this game is fucking over. It is fucking over. And they nearly did. So people will meme them, but they don't understand, because this composition is unconventional, what it is supposed to do and how extremely threatening it can be. And not only that, but here's another layer of brilliance to this. They had this planned. They played game 1 with Senna Yasuo on red side. So it looked in the final game. Now, I don't necessarily agree with, like, Burdol Azir top lane. Like, it had to be weird in order to, like, kind of, Giga Brain the draft. But the thing about this is that when you see, if you're making your last picks as T1, and all they have is the red 5 pick left, right? And you see Azir, Poppy, Yasuo, Senna, and they've already played a Yasuo Senna bot lane in game 1 of this series into, by the way, Sivir and Yuumi. So this was very clearly, we are going to give you Yuumi and play Yasuo into you. But wait, we also have another plan, right? They had two different plans to deal with this.
Yeah, I think that
that's just smart.
They,
like, it's very deceptive.
Yeah, it was very smart. Like, it was deceptive. It was smart. Like, it was Giga Brain. It didn't work at the end of it because they were given the runaround by T1. I think this could have worked way better. And some people, I've talked to a lot of people about this, especially the LCK casters, but the lane setup of the Azir top and the Yasuo mid, we were expecting, Valdez and I were casting this, that it was going to be the Azir mid and the Yasuo top.
Sure.
The Yasuo tries to just do insane amounts of damage to the Gnar, and in mid, you're just poking a Galio, so you have prio. We've seen Azir into Galio so many times, and yeah, Galio got buffed, and it's not as strong of a matchup for the Azir anymore, but it's still very strong for controlling prio. Instead, we played melee into the Galio, which is not as strong of a lane, and then the Azir into the Gnar, in theory, is a strong matchup. Like, everybody agrees about that, but Zeus built early Merc treads, and then he was just out trading repeatedly in the top lane. Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot of control there. So without really having clear prio top or mid, I think this composition struggled to set up for objectives a lot more than if they had gone for the Azir mid and the Yasuo top. They would have had way more opportunities to control the side lanes and control basically set up for the earlier objectives to stack Drakes, etc. Like, this comp was so close to perfection. It really was. And like you mentioned, the Baron steal, which I had forgotten about until you mentioned it, where the Yuumi steals the Baron away, is also crazy. And we could be living in a world where DAMWON go to the finals.
Let's also be clear that should have never happened. Not only because it's Yuumi stealing a Baron, which is ridiculous, but also because with this composition that DAMWON KIA is running, they should never be flipping Baron. Like, they have insane zone control. So, like, that shouldn't have been happening. But in spite of that happening, if they get that Baron, I think they kind of trip over themselves and win.
Yeah. Otherwise, the series I thought was really interesting in terms of how Duckdom showed a different color, like, not with his Heimerdinger, but also just his aggressive bot lane champs. Like, we saw Kalista versus Raven, and it felt like both of these teams were absolutely going to play around Gumayusi's strength instead of playing the opposite way. I think DAMWON could have looked for Yuumi drafts a lot better, or denied Yuumi drafts better, but also could have taken that tool themselves. Like, they were so hell-bent on these first few games, the Draven Kalista setup. And yeah, I get the Yasuo in game one, like, that was cool, and it was an interesting idea, but why let Guma play his best champion? And Duckdom has historically not been a strong player of either the Kalista or the Draven themselves. Like, why play into Guma's Kalista here? Why play into that style when you have Duckdom who can play Aphelios, who can play a large amount of champions? He's like Prince, like aiming, a late game player, not a tempo based player. I just felt like DAMWON KIA weren't playing to their bottom 2v2 strengths, and as a result, a Gumayusi who looked fairly weak in the last end of regular season on in bottom 2v2s on non Kalista Draven champions, getting to play the Kalista just felt like I feel like if I was prepping for the series, I would have definitely looked at the bottom 2v2 very differently, because they gave Guma comfort. And
I mean, I guess, but I think one of the things that I liked about DAMWON KIA's drafts in this series is that they had, you see it in game 1 and game 5 with the different ways they were going to play Yasuo with Senna, right? And then in games 2 and games 3, you see an adaptation in terms of, well, we are going to be on blue side. We're going to first pick the Renekton, and we know, okay, they're going to pick Kalista Wukong. We pick Draven Braum, and this happened in both games. They pick a Mumu. Okay, and the first time this happens in game 2, then the Sylas and Gnar come out for T1. DAMWON takes Poppy LeBlanc. They end up losing that game. Next game, the first phase of the drafts goes exactly the same. This time, DAMWON just bans out the Sylas. And how do they react? Oh, well, they see the Lissandra all of a sudden. Then here comes the Morgana, which has been a peanut special so far this season, but Canyon pulls it out. So they have the Black Shield to deal with some of this, CC. Now, normally Peanut plays it into Vi. But with the Lissandra, you're feeling pretty good about it, especially with the Draven. You just black shield the Draven, and you're feeling great. And then
into Aatrox, Wukong as well. You're feeling pretty good.
Yeah. Oh no, they didn't even pick. They dropped the Aatrox ban from game 2. Then they pick Swain, and at this point in time, it's Kalista, Wukong, Amumu, Lissandra, Aatrox, all very short range champions into fucking like Morgana ult, Wayne ult, Braum ult. Like, this was a really good draft from DAMWON. And they had a really good read on how to adapt from the first game into the second game. Like, I actually really like DAMWON's drafts throughout a lot of this series.
Yeah, I thought the draft was amazing. I thought that was my favorite draft of all of them, and I'm kind of a Morgana one-trick these days, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I really enjoyed it because everything about that draft felt strong into what T1 were running. That being said, going back and watching that game unfold, they were losing that game. They were not in control, and one binding that led to a pick that led to a Baron actually saved them. We were joking, off camera that it was the binding that changed history, because like, if that binding doesn't hit and they don't get that pick and then get Baron, like, they probably lose the series like right there, and we don't actually get to see the almost reverse sweep. And so Canyon had a great series, I thought, overall. I think it was a bit of a return to form for him. He also had a pretty good series against KT, so feeling much better about how it's looking for Canyon in the future, especially going into potentially Worlds, because it was not looking great for him for a while. I thought that draft was well crafted. I thought it was also kind of poignant how DAMWON prevented KT's reverse sweep to move to the semifinals, and then they almost reverse swept, and then T1 prevented their reverse sweep as well in this best of 5. Overall, I think that T1, like, if we could use this as a potential segue, T1 playing against DAMWON this close showed that DAMWON had some tricks up their sleeves, but also, will T1 be ready for a much stronger opponent in Gen.G?
No. Here's the thing about this series. Like, I do think, like, it's not that either of these teams played badly in this series. I think it was a pretty good series overall and showed some pretty high level play. The problem is like, again, DAMWON's issues are operating their own compositions. It's almost like they're overwhelmed in their shot calling, and they run such weird things that you really have to have a clear idea of win conditions that it just feels like DAMWON lacks. And I think that was really evident in game number 5. Like, it shows the depth of their champion pools, but it's like, you can have a lot of tools, but if you don't know how to fucking use all your tools, they end up being useless and you hurt yourself with them, right?
Yeah.
Whereas T1, the thing about T1 that's interesting to me is that they're not exactly the most meta team. Like, they play weird, like, kind of periphery fringe meta picks. Like, the Lee Sin was very successful for them, and they like going for these like clutch plays. So even though we look at Owner and we're like, why aren't you good at Poppy at this point in time when it's such a high priority pick, right? You look at some of the things that they choose, and it's like, is Kalista really that good right now? I'm not sure that that's true, but you're still going to play it and you're still going to do well. Towards the end of the split, in their last couple of matches, their last match in particular, they were doing really well with Draven and Kalista, which is certainly a viable style that you can play right now, but you have to get these early game advantages, otherwise you just get fucked. So the thing about T1 that's impressive is not really like their champion pools or compositions, even though especially T1's bot lane will sometimes do weird things like they have throughout this entire split. But it's really their ability to read other teams' compositions. I analyze their win conditions, and they're like, okay, we have this toolbox that we know really well. And these are playmaking champions that we can use. And so here's the play we have to make. We have to get rid of this vision and set this trap, or we have to play for picks, or we have to, jostle DAMWON KIA out of the river by just like constantly rotating around the map and forcing them away from this objective. This is what they're really good at, is that kind of read and mid and late game shot calling. The issue is I think that when Gen.G is playing really standard and has a very good idea of their own win conditions, that it's really hard for T1 to one-up Gen.G, because Gen.G is just playing a better selection of champions.
I just realized we didn't talk about Nuguri versus Burdol.
Oh, yeah, we can do that.
We should probably do that.
Because okay, here's the other thing about that. So with DAMWON KIA,
before we go on to the finals preview,
before we go into the finals preview, I think that DAMWON couldn't pick side in the first game of this series, but they could pick side in game 2 and 3, and they couldn't pick side in game 4 and 5 because they were winning, right? So when you see game 2, and Burdol does pretty bad on Renekton in game 2 as a first pick, well, you still want to first pick Renekton because the leads you can get with this champion are fucking bananas right now, very strong, because it snowballs so hard. And you put Nuguri in, and then he does really, really well in this Renekton. But we just don't know if Nuguri is like part of the plan when it comes to what we saw, which is like DAMWON KIA uses their next 2 drafts to do surprising shit on R5. And that surprising shit was Burdol playing Yone and then Burdol playing Azir. So the question is Nuguri in a condition right now where he could do, if this is their game plan, can Nuguri execute on this? Or is he just there to like first pick Renekton?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. Like it's a pretty weird situation where they play the same champion back to back, and Nuguri comes out on it in game 3. But it was a pretty unique draft, right? That was the Morgana draft, and
yep.
A lot of people
Renekton
were like,
Morgana
Nuguri
is like super strong together.
Yeah,
super strong.
It's busted, and like, if you have any sort of setup CC on or a strong AP jungler, it always works well with Renekton. That's why Nidalee Renekton has been a thing where you just set up for the spears. There's a lot of damage there. You dive super hard. You do a ton of damage. These types of junglers are great. Morgana roots somebody in place. Extra damage comes in on the pool. Renekton holds them in place a second time. They take tons of pool damage, all the Q damage, etc. But the way that they subbed Nuguri into this game, and he played, Renekton again, very different composition to games 1 and 2, but
he also just played Renekton straight up better. I mean, he got huge advantages in the top.
He got a huge advantage in the lane. Like, that was why it was controversial, right? So he played way better than Burdol in the laning phase, and then he was subbed out. It seems like it was based on these niche picks they had coming up.
Yep.
But you could also make the argument that, and I don't think this is what Danny did, but like, I had the thought of, if we get 3-0'd, I want Nuguri to be able to play one game. And I'm going to let him play. I'm going to put him in game 3 and see if he can prove himself. And then he did fine. And then Danny's like, oh, we're actually not getting 3-0'd. We got a chance in the series. Like, let's put Burdol back in, and we're going to play those unique comps we had prepared. I don't think that's necessarily what happened, but there's an argument to be made there. This all goes back to the unknown, which is why Burdol was playing in the previous series in the first place, and why he's playing over Nuguri. If they're having some internal issues, if Nuguri's just not performing well in scrims.
I mean, and to be fair,
these things we don't know.
I didn't think when I watched DAMWON KIA this split that I wasn't like, oh, Nuguri is a problem.
No,
that wasn't my.
But he wasn't a strength that we expected him to be, but he wasn't a problem, and I think he underperformed our expectations, but was not an issue, right? And here's another angle, too, that we've talked about a lot in the past with Burdol, is that Burdol is a very extremely powerful, strong side player. Nuguri in the past has been, too, but he kind of got relegated to weak side during this meta, and perhaps maybe he's a bit rusty on, or at least maybe Danny thought he was rusty on controlling Renekton, and so that's why they put Burdol in, because Burdol historically, Renekton, a top pick for him, Aurelia, Camille, these types of champions, he's so good on. So when Renekton became meta on 12-14 right before the playoffs, maybe that's why they were like, just for the extra flexibility, we're putting him on this champion. I think that's like the obvious answer that's in everyone's faces. I think it's more fun to like try to find other reasons, but I think that's why he was playing more often than perhaps Danny was like, well, I've been screwing with him. Maybe even though Nuguri outperformed him, like, let's stick to what we practiced. Let's stick to what we prepared. Maybe Nuguri wasn't communicating as much even in that win, so they were like, yeah, we're going to move back to some of those weirder drafts in the last 2 games, and we'll put Burdol back in. There's a lot of ways to look at it that way. I don't think, as the fans were very upset about, like, he laned better, though, like, why'd they pull him out? It sounds like, the fan sort of, I like Nuguri more, I know that name, I hope he plays more, kind of outrage, because I think there's a lot of reasons why he was subbed out and why he wasn't playing in the first place. We don't know. We don't have proof of these concepts, but we can consider them.
I think we can, at the very least, say that now in retrospect, looking at the last 2 games and the fact that DAMWON was, if they were going to win this series, was never going to get side selection again, and that we now know, we have more information about how they had different drafts for different things because they were manipulating their draft concepts. They had like several draft concepts, and then they were doing very different things with them depending on game to game. So it was very deceptive, right? If they really prioritized these kind of picks and like these weird drafts that were smart, then that might be a reason why Nuguri couldn't do it, because Nuguri wasn't ready to play some of these picks, or for reasons that you've stated. But there was definitely method to this madness, and I think that deserves to be acknowledged. My problem, Wolf, is that if you want to build this incredibly intricate draft system, you have to have somebody who can wield it within the game. And maybe you're really missing Beryl right now, who is the one who could do that. And we also don't know why Bible was taken out. We only got to see 2 best of 3s. He was only really good on Amumu, so like I have no idea what the depth of his champion pool at this level of competition is, right? Maybe that was an issue. But you got to have players who can really carefully think about these kind of drafts in game and figure out those win conditions and then micromanage all of the other players. And if you do not have that, it doesn't matter if you have the coolest fucking draft in the world, because it's going to be used incompetently in the game.
Yeah.
They've got the best fucking katana that has been folded 7,000 times and given to them by an ancient master, but they just accidentally stab themselves with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a albeit somewhat simplified, good analogy of what happened. I think it was like you have like the best checkers players playing chess. Like, I don't know. It was definitely like a experience diff, and that's weird to say, but I think Faker actually having the wherewithal to be like, no, I know exactly what's going to happen. He's shot calling those moments is really...
It's very impressive from Faker's.
Because we're talking about a team that has, at least in one of these games, Nuguri, Canyon and Showmaker, and then Duck Dom and Kellen, who are also at this point pretty, they have a lot of experience themselves. It's not their first rodeo, it's not their first playoff. So it did feel like it was just one player who was able to say, okay, I know what this comp is trying to do, we're better than that. And then DAMWON kind of flubbing the execution, not being able to figure it out. But let's talk about the finals now. Let's move on and talk about the finals, because I think if DAMWON had won the series,
this should be crazy one side. If DAMWON wins the series, it might be competitive. I think this is
if DAMWON wins the series,
Gen.G.
Before the DAMWON series, I thought, I hope DAMWON doesn't win, because I think it will be the worst finals ever. But then, after watching how DAMWON played against Gen.G, I was like, oh, never mind, give me that DAMWON win. I think we're going to see something really interesting here. But the fact that they played T1 close in our first and last check for T1, because remember, T1 were looking very bad at the end of regular season. And we've speculated like, oh, maybe the games don't mean anything, they don't care, but still the players look frustrated, whatever. So that was our last look at T1 at the end of regular season. And then we went into this semifinal match. So like we kind of time skipped and we're like, all right, let's see where T1's at. And they were the smarter team, but they didn't draft very uniquely. A lot of the wins they got were around Guma playing strong side bottom.
Yep.
Champions he will probably not get. The Zerayumi he will probably not get against Gen.G.
Or if he does get them, I mean, really just won't die, so it doesn't matter.
Sure. So like how T1 won this does not instill confidence in their ability to beat Gen.G in a best of 5. And
I agree with you.
For me, we've talked about this potential meeting of these teams several times because they've met obviously twice in regular season. I think one factor that will be a huge one for T1 and against Gen.G potentially is T1 will be massive fan favorites. This is one of the biggest arenas we've had a finals in a long time. It is going to be massive. And my expectation is, especially considering the tickets went on sale, half of them went on sale like so long ago, it's going to be like 80% T1 fans and 20% Gen.G fans, if they even get 20%. Like I'm being pretty conservative here, and if the Gen.G players choke, like if they end up losing 2 games in a row, remember Doran playing Akshan in the finals, the spring season, stuff like that, where the game went completely one-sided, lopsided. Also remember Gen.G in the semifinals of Worlds. It was BDD. It was a different roster, but BDD had like the best games of his life.
Get out of here. No, I'm not. I reject that. Next.
Hey, I'm trying to create some like spiritual, like no logic, like dream world where like maybe Gen.G chokes so that we can pretend that the series could be interesting. Okay. Because I think if T1 does not get a huge momentum advantage, you know, and these players, the Gen.G players are like, oh man, if we can't do it this time, like, will we ever do it? Like, if that mental block doesn't happen, I don't see any world in a best of 5 where T1 win this series. I just do not see it. I cannot imagine it unless Gen.G choke. That is the only world I can see where Gen.G do not play their best games. Because if they play their best games and T1 plays their best games, my money's on Gen.G like every single time.
I think one of the issues that I see is they met in week 7, and it was a pretty convincing win for Gen.G. Although game 1 was close. Game 1 was a really excellent game where T1 played like the TF Nocturne pick composition and actually was dominating the early game, but Gen.G then played really, really well cross map in order to farm their way back into it and ended up doing better in the end. But the thing about Gen.G is that they were banning Draven and Yuumi. They were on red side both of those games. And T1 was the one banning the Kalista because obviously Ruler can be very dangerous with that pick. But I find it very difficult to believe that T1 is going to be able to eliminate the dangerous picks within these champion pools. Because if you go around and you ban Poppy, Kalista, Singed, and then in the second game they banned Kalista, Skarner, and Aphelios in the first rotation, you give away the Poppy, right? Because it's not owner's best champ, right? That's a huge problem for T1 that like Peanut is the Poppy god and owner kind of only relatively rarely plays it, right? It's a huge problem that Ruler is so fucking good at Lucian and Gumayusi isn't. Like that's a big deal in these drafts. Makes it really complicated for T1 to avoid scenarios where these players get these champions. And then also, Chovy is great on Sylas. Chovy is great on Azir. These are both priority picks. You'll only have so many bans. And this was before this, this was on 12-13. So it was before kind of the rise of Sivir in Korea, which really happened in earnest on 12-14. But I think it's tough. If you take away the Draven and you threaten a first pick of Yuumi if you're Gen.G on blue side, or just ban it the whole series. Like, fuck it. You don't need Yuumi if you're Gen.G. Like, Yumi's a crutch that T1 probably needs.
Yeah.
Where do they go with this? Where do they go?
Yeah, there's no real angle too, especially considering that in terms of laning right now, Chovy is pretty significantly ahead of Faker by a large margin. Like, I think that everyone agrees. Even the biggest Faker stan is not putting their vote in the Faker side of that laning matchup going into this best of 5. And
yeah, it's like what is Faker going to do? He's going to play fringe meta picks like Galio,
Lissandra, like he did all season long. Maybe he plays a game of Talia or something.
I mean, pulled out the TF in the last version. It did do well. Like they could have won that game, T1, game 1 versus Gen.
And T1 do feel like you said earlier, I think this is so true, a team that can make a composition that isn't meta work extremely well, but it
I would say fringe
can only
meta.
get you
These
so
are not
far.
like weird ass picks. They're not like DAMWON KIA weird.
Yeah.
But
they're classical picks too. Like they're picks that are.
Like, it's also like if you're owner and you can't pick Vi because the fucking Morgana is going to come out. Like it just feels like Gen.G has all of the answers.
Yeah.
and that's why it's hard. You
Doran,
start shadowboxing this matchup and you're like, what does T1 do super well? Like, where is the edge that they can get in this matchup?
Upside is, I think, where everybody is putting their focus. But as Gen.G, you can just ban Renekton, and you probably feel pretty okay about every other possible reality. And I think Renekton will probably get through a few of these drafts. And we'll see what Zeus can get done against Doran. But Doran could just play a tank. It'll just play Ornn. It's totally fine. And I think a lot of the draft will decide how the series goes, because I think T1 have way less depth in terms of what's meta, like you were saying. And if they try to run like Camille Galio or like a Lissandra counterpick to the Ahri, Chovy's like, yeah, but there are no counter picks to my Ari. I don't care. Like, you know, that's the kind of player that he is. He just lost his first professional game of Ari.
Yep.
On like his 12th or 13th game of it, I believe it was.
15th or 16th.
Maybe it's even more, but it was a lot, right? And he has played so many Lissandra games. He's played into the Vex, which was like a soft counter to the Ari back in spring season. He just doesn't care. And they'll just be like, yeah, well, we'll have a comp that beats the Lissandra. So yeah, like you might be able to have a little advantage in lane. You might be able to press R on the Ari, but that'll be a problem for you later on in a team fight where you need to actually engage or, you know, ult yourself. And I just don't see an angle to where T1 outdo Gen.G in any lane unless Guma is given Kalista or Draven into like a weaker, you know, scaling pick. Like if it's Kalista Draven into Aphelios or Kalista Draven into, God forbid, like Ezreal or something, like, you know, Ruler wants to pull that one back out. It's not meta right now. I don't see that lane being a win condition. I can't imagine mid being a win condition. And the exciting matchup, like, you know, how we always pick a key player on our broadcast, like the exciting matchup is Owner versus Peanut, because I think it is two players who are at the top of their position for very different reasons.
Yep.
I think Owner has a lot of comfort picks, but his hands, his mechanics are so good. That is his strength. And for Peanut, it's his brain. Like his pathing is good. He's intelligent. He's smarter than Owner. And like when you have two teams that are both like at the extreme high mechanical level, for me, I always would rather pick the brainy jungler. I think
it's not
in
like
a series
Peanut doesn't
like
have
this.
hands either. It's not like
Exactly. It's not like he has bad hands, but I think Owner has slightly better hands than he does.
Sure,
but
for sure,
I'm leaning towards the brainy jungler in a best of 5 when the rest of my team also has hands and better hands in the mid lane, arguably better hands in the bottom lane in the bottom 2v2.
And it's also that Canyon is the brains of this team. He's the shot caller, and he's going to be the most veteran player on this Gen.G roster. He's won titles, you know. He has
Peanut is a serious decorated player.
And people will say, "Oh yeah, but what about Peanut choking in playoffs?" Dude, that narrative hasn't been true for a while now. He hasn't fucking choked in play. Like, I think he did get crapped on by Canyon in game 5 of their best of 5 last time, but he didn't lose his head. And they ended up winning that game in what was a really fucking hard game for Peanut to play jungle. Like
it was the anti-choke game, actually. It was an anti-choke game. Like he did not choke. He had the least amount of choking.
He was. I mean, his back was against the wall in that game, and he still managed to make an impact. So I wouldn't say, and it also like obviously wasn't entirely his fault that shit went so bad. Canyon played really well. They played well around the pressure that they had in the lanes to continuously invade him. Right, it was a comp problem to a certain degree, but Peanut still won that game. So I don't think it's been Peanut choking like has been his MO in the past. And we certainly didn't see that in their game against Liiv SANDBOX. So I think that having him be the shot caller, being the most veteran player, comfortable probably in this situation is going to be very helpful for Gen.G.
I will say
it limits like the problems of other people being nervous to a large degree.
Yeah, I will say that the choking angle for Gen.G and like the pretend narrative I was kind of making up where like, oh, what if there's just too many T1 fans and like when they take their headsets off after losing game 2, like the whole crowd is cheering for T1 as they walk out, and you can like when you have that sound blocker off your ears and you're looking out in the booth, you see like the T1 fan or the T1 team walks into their coaching staff room while like there's a standing ovation after they tie the series up 1-1, and you guys are like, nobody's cheering for me. Like, I think these players are so experienced, they actually don't give a shit. Like, I could break this pretend narrative like, oh, all the fans are against them, but like, I don't think they actually care, like even slightly.
It's different coming in when you're the massive favorite. Like they just beat T1 2-0. They know they're the better team. Like it's obvious that they should be the heavy favorites here. It's not.
They had the most decisive playoff series.
Yeah, it's not like they're coming into the finals almost having lost to DAMWON KIA, like barely scraping out in that game 5, and coming in as big underdogs like they were last split. It's a very big difference in mentality. They should be extremely confident this time.
I do think, and I said Pog said a few days ago. This is like I get somewhat of a controversial take, but I think if Gen.G lose this finals, I don't think this roster will ever win an LCK title. Like if you cannot win right now,
it does feel
like if
that,
you
doesn't
cannot
it?
win right now, after you lost in spring, you know, we were having the discussions about like these players might be wondering like, am I ever going to do it? You know, with Peanut and Ruler getting very, very old. Like Peanut's the last player left of that old Rocks Tigers roster that still plays
He was also
professionally.
the
Everyone
youngest
else
player when that
he was
roster was
true.
made.
But he is also getting older. Ruler has been playing for a very long time. Like these two players are extremely veteran players, but also like, you know, how long are you going to keep playing the game? How many roster shuffles are you going to survive through without picking up an LCK title? You know, maybe they lose this one and go on to win Worlds, then I'll redact my statement. But I think if you cannot win, this 5-man unit chokes here, which again we're not expecting that. But if they mess this best of 5 up, they lose this series. I don't know how you ever recover. I don't know if the roster stays together. Obviously, Chovy has re-signed for an additional amount of time. I believe he's got an additional year after this.
Yeah,
might even be 2 years. But I know he's extended his contract already, so he's staying. But I don't know if the roster stays together. I don't know what happens after this, but there is a like serious, epic, tragic narrative that could happen if Gen.G lose this. Like it would be one of the biggest upsets we've seen in the finals in a long time because in the LCK, we have always had an expected winner in the finals, and they since I've joined, they have always won. And like usually it's always a 3-1, 3-1, they win. The one game they lost was kind of a weird game they lost, but like the rest of the games, not even close, extremely dominant series. And this is no exception. This is no exception. Like my prediction is 3-1. Yeah, I'll give T1 one game. Something will go wrong. They'll win some really cool draft.
Yep.
But it will be a 3-1 series that even though T1 won a game, people will say was very one-sided. So if Gen.G lose this one, it's like, how did this happen? Like we will have to have an extremely long discussion, and you and I definitely will if they do in fact lose it. But
yeah,
it's just so hard to even imagine that scenario.
Yeah, it does feel like this is Gen.G's best shot ever. You know, will they ever be this much better than the other teams in the league again? Will a team like T1 that has the constant ability to draw the best players from Korea due to their reputation and the ability to play with Faker, you know, the scary thing about T1 is like, you know that the next great rookie is just going to show up on T1 again at some point in time, and they always have that well of new talent to draw from, and they've been very good at developing it. So they will be back no matter what, you would have to assume. So what is this like? Is Gen.G ever going to get a better shot? The meta seems to be suiting them. They are leading the global meta in certain ways with certain picks and with their style. We've seen them play very well from ahead in Snowball. We saw them play from behind very well in their last regular season matchups versus T1 and DAMWON KIA, which was a question mark for me. I was like, what happens when this team gets behind early against a good opponent? And the answer is they play really measured, safe, farm up on Chovy. They just take all of the resources on the map, and then they fight you when the time is right. And they're really good about slowing down the game so their opponents can't win and making sure that their win conditions are set. This is a very good team. This is a very, very good team.
There have been many, 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 many games of T1 this season where they won, but we were very disappointed. A lot of mistakes were made. There were some bad drafts. There was that Nongshim series. There were the telecom wars. Like there's been a lot of question marks for T1 all season long. I think they finished strong in that semifinal match against DAMWON. I can give them props for that. But overall, even in these 6 games that Gen.G dropped this season, we have never really been critical of how they've played that much. Like we haven't really been like, you know, I'm a little bit worried about what Gen.G's trajectory here after that one game they lost. Like, not sure where their future lies. But we've had those same questions about T1 many, many times.
Yeah.
And Gen.G has just been the pinnacle of, the epitome of consistency all season long. And if they lose this, I don't even know what we will say on the mics when it happens, because it is just so unbelievable.
No one is. You haven't talked to anybody who is like an analyst either on the English or Korean side who's crazy enough to predict T1, have you?
No. No one. I have not heard that a T1 prediction from anyone so far.
Yeah.
And I don't think we will get one. When we do have the official predictions for all the talent, maybe someone like Jonah Strong or Cloud Templar is crazy enough to do the "haha, I was right" prediction,
Right.
like to do a Hail Mary. But I don't think you should be predicting T1 here. I don't think anybody is. Maybe the T1 players might even have some doubt because it is going to be such a hard matchup. Media Day was yesterday. I didn't watch all of it, but I saw some clips from it on Twitter, and it was just kind of like a lot of T1 being like, "How cool would it be if we did it? Like we won last time, and like it's been such a great year for us."
And also like, just look at this. Think about the stakes too. Like this is Ruler's first, Ruler and Chovy's first chance to win a domestic title. It's true of Doran and Lehens.
Doran and Lehens also.
Some of the old Griffin but the point is that for Ruler and Chovy, it's very significant because Ruler's fucking won Worlds, but he's never won a domestic title. Like, what does T1 care? They are already qualified for Worlds. They're already qualified in second place. They're not going to be in Gen.G's group. They don't have to play in play-ins. Like, they just won. Like, how? Just in terms of how badly people want it, I would think Gen.G would want this 1 million times more than T1.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is why after MSI, when we went into the media day for summer season, we've talked about this before on the show, but basically every team chooses who they think is going to win the season, and you can't pick yourself. And only T1 picked Gen.G, which is kind of ironic now that we've gone all the way to the end of the season and they're their opponent in the finals. But everyone else picked either T1 or DAMWON. And there were like 2 DAMWON votes, and it was like mostly T1. Everyone's like, yeah, I think T1 will win again. And we were asked as well, the casters were asked who we thought would win the season if we just had to like have a kind of Hail Mary prediction, like, oh, let's, crystal ball this. I said Gen.G because they had so much more to play for. They hadn't won. They hadn't had a record-breaking perfect season and then go all the way to MSI finals, and they didn't have the MSI hangover, they didn't have the loss and all that. There's still a strong super team that was playing T1 close, and I have all the extra time to prepare for this meta. Like, I was like, how is Gen.G not win this season? Like, if I, at that time I was thinking about it, of course, there were a lot of ways it could have gone wrong, but looking back on it, like, I still think all those things are true. I still think these Gen.G players want it more. They have more to play for. They have more to earn. And will they win Worlds? Who knows? But right now, I think there's no way you can tell me that Faker he wants his 11th title more than Chovy wants his first one. There's just no way you can tell me that.
Especially when both of these teams are already guaranteed Worlds, and they're already guaranteed to not be, because you can't have the same teams from the same region in the same group. So they're not going to face each other, and it's just like, it doesn't really matter which group you end up in, because you only have to get top 2 to get out into playoffs, right? The only thing that matters is you're guaranteed, and you don't have to play in play-ins. Both of these things are true. Therefore, it's really hard to believe that T1 would be hungrier in this circumstance than Gen.G would. Even from an organizational perspective, like, obviously the Gen.G org is going to be way hungrier and much more, like, the coaching staff is going to be much more invested than T1's. I mean, T1, the joke is they don't really have a coaching staff. The joke is T1 doesn't, Faker's the coach. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of trucks about that as well. But I think that for me, like, looking at Score as well in his first year of coaching, he probably would love to be able to say that he just got out of the military, became a coach instantly, back-to-back finals. He's already got that in his resume, but getting the win here against T1 in his first year as a coach, like getting back-to-back finals, but also a title, that's huge. And I mean, I think that it's crazy to even imagine that he is coaching this roster against Faker and all the narratives that come with that. But it's going to be a good finals. I think it is going to be like viewership record breaking potentially if it goes to more than 4 games. If it's like a 3-0, maybe it won't break the record for last finals, but it's going to be big. It's going to be exciting. You guys should definitely watch it. But it might not be good. I will give you guys the caveat. It might not be a good finals.
In my experience, Korean League of Legends finals are rarely good. they're rarely good. Even when you get the matchup that you want, like this one, like we didn't need double limb to get this is the correct matchup that we wanted. And it's still probably not going to be good. All right. Well, that'll wrap it up. Maybe Wolf and I will be very wrong when we do an episode next week and talk about these finals. Clearly, we think we're going to be pretty right, and maybe there won't be much to talk about besides the upcoming gauntlet, which will be actually quite interesting to discuss about which teams we would like to qualify from Korea given their recent performances. So we'll see you then.